What's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. Today is February 23rd, 2026, about 7:05 p.m. where I'm at right now. And we are continuing our 19th book in our Books React series. This is episode 2 of Mark Fisher's Capitalist Realism. Is There No Alternative? This was a book suggested by my longtime subscriber, friend, supporter, Nelson Moreno. In our last reading, we read the first 3 chapters of this text written by this Marxist, socialist thinker who was from the UK. He killed himself a few years ago, but yet and still his words live on. Previously, we read the chapters. It's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. What if you held a protest and everyone came? And capitalism and the real. And so far, the book has been very philosophical as he tackles the ideas that shape our worldview in relation to capitalism and how we think about ourselves within it. For today's reading, we're only going to read 2 chapters, chapters 4 and 5. Let's start here with chapter 4. I will be reading comments from people that jump into the live stream on either section. So if you're going to reply in the vertical live stream or the horizontal one, I got you. You will get a shout out, and any questions that come my way will get dealt with. Without further ado, let's get into it. Chapter 4, Reflexive Impotence, Immobilization, and Liberal Communism. By contrast with their forebears in the 1960s and 70s, British students today appear to be politically disengaged. While French students can still be found on the streets protesting against neoliberalism, British students, whose situation is incomparably worse, seem resigned to their fate. But this, I want to argue, is a matter not of apathy nor of cynicism, but of reflexive impotence. They know things are bad, but more than that, they know they can't do anything about it. But that knowledge, that reflexivity, is not a passive observation of an already existing state of affairs. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Reflexive impotence amounts to an unstated worldview amongst the British young, and it has its correlate in widespread pathologies. Many of the teenagers I worked with had mental health problems or learning difficulties. Depression is endemic. It is the condition most dealt with by the National Health Service and is afflicting people at increasingly younger ages. The number of students who have had some variant of dyslexia is astonishing. It is not an exaggeration to say that being a teenager in late capitalist Britain is now close to being reclassified as a sickness. This pathologization already forecloses any possibility of politicization. By privatizing these problems, treating them as if they were caused only by chemical imbalances in the individual's neurology and/or by their family background, any question of social systemic causation is ruled out. Many of the teenage students I encountered seem to be in a state of what I would call depressive hedonia. Depression is usually characterized as a state of anhedonia, but the condition I'm referring to is constituted not by an inability to get pleasure so much as it by an inability to do anything except pursue pleasure. Okay, so what he's basically saying here is like the students he's meeting, they're just sort of like nihilistic, hedonistic, and sort of like apathetic about the world around them. There is a sense that something is missing, but no appreciation that this mysterious missing enjoyment can only be accessed beyond the pleasure principle. In large part, this is a consequence of students' ambiguous structural position, stranded between their old roles as subjects of disciplinary institutions and their new status as consumers of services. In his crucial essay, Postscripts on Societies of Control, Deleuze distinguishes between the disciplinary societies described by Foucault, which were organized around the enclosed spaces of the factory, the school, and the prison, and the new control societies in which all institutions are embedded in a dispersed corporation. Deleuze is right to argue that Kafka is the prophet of distributed cybernetic power that is typical of controlled societies. In the trial, Kafka importantly distinguishes between 2 types of acquittal available to the accused. Definite acquittal is no longer possible. If it ever was, we have only only legendary accounts of ancient cases, which provide instances of acquittal. The two remaining options then are: one, ostensible acquittal, in which the accused is to all intents and purposes acquitted, but may later, at some unspecified time, face the charges in full; or two, indefinite postponement, in which the accused engages in what they hope is an infinitely protracted process of legal wrangling, so that the dreaded ultimate judgment is unlikely to be forthcoming. Deleuze observes that the control societies delineated by Kafka himself, but also by Foucault and Burroughs, operate using indefinite postponement. Education, as a lifelong process, training that persists for as long as your working life continues. Work you take home with you, working from home, homing from work. A consequence of this indefinite mode of power is the external surveillance a consequence of this indefinite mode of power is that external surveillance is succeeded by internal policing. Control only works if you are complicit with it. Hence the Burroughs figure of the control addict, the one who is addicted to control, but also inevitably the one who has been taken over, possessed by control. Walk into almost any class at the college where I taught, and you will immediately appreciate that you are in a post-disciplinary framework. Foucault painstakingly enumerated the way in which discipline was installed through the imposition of rigid body postures. During lessons at our college, however, students will be found slumped on desk, talking almost constantly, snacking incessantly, or even on occasions eating full meals. The old disciplinary segmentation of time is breaking down. The carceral regime of discipline is being eroded by the technologies of control, with their systems of perpetual consumption and continuous development. Sounds like, adult college, late night school, like what your boy's going through. Yeah, we're living through it, buddy. We are living through it. The system by which the college is funded means that it literally cannot afford to exclude students, even if it wanted to. Resources are allocated to colleges on the basis of how successfully they meet targets on achievement, exam results, attendance, and retention of students. This combination of market imperatives with bureaucratically defined targets is typical of the market Stalinist initiatives which now regulate public services. The lack of an effective disciplinary system has not, to say the least, been compensated for by an increase in students' self-motivation. Students are aware that if they don't attend for weeks on end, and or if they don't produce any work, they will not face any meaningful sanction. Okay, that's not true for my university. You gotta attend some of the classes. They typically respond to this freedom not by pursuing projects, but by falling into hedonic or anhedonic lassitude, the soft narcosis, the comfort food oblivion of PlayStation, all-night TV, and marijuana. Ask students to read for more than a couple of sentences, and many, and these are A-level students, mind you, will protest that they can't do it. The most frequent complaint teachers hear is that it's boring. It is not so much the content of the written material that is at issue here. It is the act of reading itself that is deemed to be boring. What we are facing here is not just time-honored teenage torpor, but the mismatch between a post-literate new flesh that is too wired to concentrate and the confining concentrated logics of decaying disciplinary systems. To be bored simply means to be removed from the communicative sensation stimulus matrix of texting, YouTube, and fast food. To be denied, for a moment, the constant flow of sugary gratification on demand. Some students want Nietzsche in the same way that they want a hamburger. They fail to grasp, and the logic of the consumer system encourages this misapprehension that the indigestibility, the difficulty, is Nietzsche. I feel a little bit here like Mark Fisher is becoming like, grandpa, yelling at the TV. Kids nowadays don't know how good they have it. I get that there's an argument to be made that education has been eroded so much by capitalism that now these colleges, universities, any sort of learning institution has been tainted by the smell of money. And trust me, I'm a teacher. That's how I make my money. That's how I get to wear quarter zips. I know that a lot of the times it's all about passing the student. getting them to the next grade. I understand that. But the way this reads, the way it's reading right now, it's more like an indictment on the student. Oh, these kids nowadays just want to stuff their face with chips and burgers and they don't want to even read Nietzsche. I mean, to some degree, we have to adjust and adapt if we want to educate people, which is why I'm doing the readings on live, which is why I'm chopping them up into shorts. You get what I'm saying? Because we have to go where the people are and not yell at them to come where we are. We like to read. We like to educate. We're the vanguard. So we have to bring the knowledge to the 85ers. You know what I mean? I used to be a 5%er. The 5%ers believe that 5% of people have knowledge of self. They're awoke, they're conscious, and they're aware of the 10% who are vampires on the 85% who are dumb, deaf, blind, and ignorant, right? I forgot my 120 lessons, but that's generally the idea. Most people are pretty stupid, they're apolitical, they're apathetic, and they just want to have a good life. They just want to have fun. They just want a good job. That's what most people want. You get what I'm saying? So they don't know that the cost of that is either the alienation of themselves or the deprivation of others. And that's what's up to us, the enlightened, to actually do. Take it to them, bring it to them so that they know, okay? All right. Nelson Moreno says we have to make some compromise, meet them where they're at. Exactly. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. We got to meet the people where they at, not just yell at the kids because they want YouTube and Gwen Stefani mixtapes. I don't know. Anyway, continuing here in Mark Fisher's work, he says, an illustration. I challenged one student about why he always wore headphones in class. He replied that it didn't matter because he wasn't actually playing any music. In another lesson, he was playing music at very low volume through the headphones without wearing them. When I asked him to switch it off, he replied that even he couldn't hear it. Why wear the headphones without playing music or play music without wearing the headphones? Because the presence of the phones on the ears or the knowledge that the music is playing, even if he couldn't hear it, was a reassurance that the matrix was still there, within reach. Besides, in a classic example of interpassivity, if the music was still playing, even if he couldn't hear it, then the player could still enjoy it on his behalf. The use of headphones is significant here. Pop is experienced, but not as something which could have impacts upon public space, but as a retreat into private odipod, consumer bliss, a walling up against the social. I get what he's saying because I'm sort of guilty of that. I mean, I'm a cringe millennial. I'm 35 years old, but I also grew up with headphones on my head all the time, always listening to music, walking around with a CD player. In fact, I could even remember for briefly having a cassette player. Briefly had a cassette player. Then there was this weird era. Y'all don't know this. If you're Gen Z, you don't know this. There was this weird era in between the CD and the streaming era where there were these like compact mini discs that you could download like maybe 100 songs on an MP3, and they would sell like these like MP3 type players, right? And they were always tied to like some bullshit, record company or like some bullshit music company that was trying to revolutionize music and shit like that. But yeah, I was even on that. And I always had headphones on, walking around the house, walking my dog, working out, or when I got my first car, always playing music. You get what I'm saying? And I just feel like a little bit like Mark Fisher is coming across like the old man that hates the new kids rock and roll. That's just what I'm saying. Okay. Nelson says, yo, Mark was frustrated. He was very frustrated, a little bit, which I understand because he's giving a critique of capitalism and how it's distorted all forms of human society. But whenever we give our critiques of capitalism, we should always remember to critique the system and not the people. You get what I'm saying? This is why we say, we don't blame black people in general for, the single mother epidemic, which is not really a single mother epidemic, but there is a large proportion of black women who are raising black children without their black fathers, right? You get what I'm saying? That is a problem, but it's not the majority of people, right? Or we don't blame black poverty on black people. We blame it on the system of white supremacy and capitalism. So it's the same thing here that I have a problem with Mark's analysis, but it's still funny. It's still good. Let's continue here. The consequence of being hooked into the entertainment matrix is twitchy, agitated interpassivity, an inability to concentrate or focus. Students' incapacity to connect current lack of focus with future failure, their inability to synthesize time into any coherent narrative, is symptomatic of more than mere demotivation. It is, in fact, eerily reminiscent of Jameson's analysis in postmodernism and consumer society. Jameson observed that Lacan's theory of schizophrenia offered a suggestive aesthetic model for understanding the fragmenting of subjectivity in the face of the emerging entertainment industrial complex. With the breakdown of the signifying chain, Jameson summarized, the Lacanian schizophrenic is reduced to an experience of pure material signifiers, or in other words, a series of pure and unrelated presents in time. Jameson was writing in the late 1980s, that is, the period in which most of my students were born. What we in the classroom are now facing is a generation born into that ahistorical, anti-mnemonic blip culture, a generation, that is to say, for whom time has always come ready cut into digital micro slices. Okay, he's describing the millennials. He's talking about my generation, and I think he's being a little bit harsh. Yes, us millennials, we grew up on TV, microwave dinners, you know what I'm saying, Saturday morning cartoons. And yes, we were the first ones with the internet, you know what I mean? We were children of the internet. We're not babies of the internet like Gen Z, you know what I'm saying? But yes, I disagree with that assessment a bit. But anyway, continuing, Marx says, if the figure of discipline was the worker prisoner, the figure of control is the debtor addict. Well, that's absolutely true. I agree with that. Cyberspatial capital operates by addicting its users. William Gibson recognized that in Neuromancer, when he had Case and the other cyberspace cowboys feeling insects under the skin strung out when they unplugged from the matrix, Case's amphetamine habit is plainly the substitute for an addiction to a far more abstract speed. If then something like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is a pathology, it is a pathology of late capitalism, a consequence of being wired into the entertainment control circuits of hyper-mediated consumer culture. Similarly, what is called dyslexia may in many cases amount to post-lexia. Teenagers process capital's image-dense data very effectively without any need to read. Slogan recognition is sufficient to navigate the NetMobile magazine informational plane. So basically what he's saying is like, you know, kids nowadays don't have to learn how to read like reading Nietzsche, because nowadays text and information flows at them so quick, and it's often accompanied by image. So yeah, anyway. Writing has never been capitalism's thing. Capitalism is profoundly illiterate. Deleuze and Guattari argued in Anti-Oedipus. Electrical language does not go by way of the voice or writing. Data processing does without them both. Hence the reason that many successful business people are dyslexic. But is their post-lexical efficiency a cause or effect of their success? Teachers are now put under intolerable pressure to mediate between the post-literate subjectivity of the late capitalist consumer and the demands of the disciplinary regime to pass examinations, etc. This is one way in which education, far from being in some ivory tower safely inured from the real world, is the engine room of the reproduction of social reality, directly confronting the inconsistencies of the capitalist social field. Teachers are caught between being facilitator entertainers and disciplinarian authoritarians. Teachers want to help students to pass the exam. They want us to be authority figures who tell them what to do. Teachers being interpolated by students as authority figures exacerbates the boredom problem, since isn't anything that comes from the place of authority a priori boring? Ironically, the role of disciplinarian is demanded of educators more than ever at precisely the time when disciplinary structures are breaking down in institutions. With families bucking under the pressure of capitalism, which requires both parents to work, teachers are now increasingly required to act as surrogate parents, instilling the most basic behavioral protocols in students and providing pastoral and emotional support for teenagers who are in some cases only minimally socialized. It is worth stressing that none of the students I taught had any legal obligation to be at college. They could leave if they wanted to, but the lack of any meaningful employment opportunities together with cynical encouragement from government means that college seems to be the easier, safer option. Deleuze says that control societies are based on debt rather than enclosure, but there is a way in which the current education system both indebts and encloses students. Pay for your own exploitation, the logic insists. Get into debt so you can get the same Mick job you could have walked into if you left school at 16. Damn, okay, he is spitting. He is spitting. Mark is spitting. Mark is saying, you dumb motherfuckers going to college. Mark is the college dropout. Jameson observed that the breakdown of temporality suddenly releases the present of time from all the activities and intentionalities that might focus it and make it a space of praxis. But nostalgia for the context in which the old types of praxis operated is plainly useless. That is why French students don't in the end constitute an alternative to British reflexive impotence. That the neoliberal economist would deride French opposition to capitalism is hardly surprising. Yet its mockery of French immobilization had a point. Certainly, the students who kicked off the latest protests seemed to think that they were reenacting the events of May 1968, their parents spraying on Charles de Gaulle. It wrote in its lead article on March 30th, 2006, they have borrowed its slogan, beneath the cobblestones, the beach, and hijacked its symbols, the Sorbonne University. In this sense, the revolt appears to be the natural sequel to 2005's suburban riots, which prompted the government to impose a state of emergency. Then it was the jobless, ethnic underclass that rebelled against a system that excluded them. Yet the striking features of the latest protest movement is that this time the rebellious forces are on the side of conservatism. Unlike the rioting youths in the banlieues, the objectives of the students and public sector trade unions is to prevent change and to keep France the way it is. Now that's my type of conservatism. That's my type of conservatism. Mr. Funny C8L says, can I be a mod? First, I have to ask you, Mr. Funny C8L, I have to ask you to finish this line. Mr. Funny, you can become a mod if you can finish this line. I ain't a killer, but don't push me. Revenge is like the sweetest joy. Complete that line. Complete that line. I ain't a killer, but don't push me. Revenge is like the sweetest joy next to getting. All right. All right, continuing here. Oh, and you also have to finish this line. There's a specter haunting Europe, and that is the specter of... Finish those two lines. I ain't a killer, but don't push me. Revenge is like the sweetest joy next to... And there's a specter haunting Europe, and that is the specter of... Okay. And then you can be a mod. Continuing here. It's striking how the practice of many of the immobilizers is a kind of inversion of that of another group who also count themselves heirs of 68, the so-called liberal communists such as George Soros and Bill Gates, who combine rapacious pursuit of profit with the rhetoric of ecological concern and social responsibility. Alongside their social concern, liberal communists believe that work practices should be post-modernized in line with the concept of being smart. As Zizek explains, being smart means being dynamic and nomadic and against centralized bureaucracy, believing in dialogue and cooperation as against central authority, in flexibility as against routine, culture and knowledge as against industrial production, and spontaneous interaction and autopoiesis as against fixed hierarchy. Well, that sounds like me. Sounds like me. Taken together, the immobilizers, with their implicit concession that capitalism can only be resisted, never overcome, and the liberal communists who maintain that the amoral excesses of capitalism must be offset by charity, give a sense of the way in which capitalist realism circumscribes current political possibilities. Whereas the immobilizers retain the form of 68-style protest, but in the name of resistance to change, liberal communists energetically embrace newness. Zizek is right to argue that, far from constituting any kind of progressive corrective to official capitalist ideology, liberal communism constitutes the dominant ideology of capitalism now. Flexibility, nomadism, and spontaneity are the very hallmarks of management in a post-Fordist control society. But the problem is that any opposition to flexibility and decentralization risks being self-defeating, since calls for inflexibility and centralization are, to say the least, not likely to be very galvanizing. So basically what he's saying here is like, in this new capitalist system, you got to be mobile, nimble, quick, easy to adjust, because this new system is moving people, places, and people with different skill sets in various different capacities. And also, by the way, they don't want to actually have any responsibility to you as an employee. So be fast, be quick, be able to switch jobs and do different jobs, and also be able to pay for your own healthcare and your own retirement plan. Okay, get that 401k set up, right? And he's saying here that, in this new world, any type of movement to actually centralize people, to move people into some sort of inflexible role, which is actually more healthier for workers, is actually not very motivating and galvanizing, because people like the idea of freedom, or the elusive fake freedom capitalism seems to put in their face. Continuing here. In any case, resistance to the new is not a cause that the left can or should rally around. Capital thought really carefully about how to break labor, yet there has still not yet been enough thought about what tactics will work against capital in conditions of post-Fordism, and what new language can be innovated to deal with those conditions. It is important to contest capitalism's appropriation of the new, but to reclaim the new can't be a matter of adapting to the conditions in which we find ourselves. We've done that rather too well, and successful adaptation is the strategy of managerialism par excellence. The persistent association of neoliberalism with the term restoration, favored by both Badiou and David Harvey, is an important corrective to the association of capital with novelty. For Harvey and Badiou, neoliberal politics are not about the new, but a return of class power and privilege. In France, Badiou has said, restoration refers to the period of the return of the king in 1815, after the revolution and Napoleon. We are in such a period. Today we see liberal capitalism and its political system, parliamentarianism, as the only natural and acceptable solutions. Harvey argues that neoliberalization is best conceived of as a political project to reestablish the conditions for capital accumulation and to restore the power of economic elites. Harvey demonstrates that in an era popularly described as post-political, class war has continued to be fought, but only by one side, the wealthy. After the implementation of neoliberal policies in the late 1970s, Harvey reveals the share of national income of the top 1% of income earners soared to reach 15%. By the end of the century, the top 0.1% of income earners in the U.S. increased their share of the national income from 2% in 1978 to over 6% in 1999, while the ratio of the median compensation of workers to the salaries of CEOs increased from just over 30 to 1 in 1970 to nearly 500 to 1 by 2000. The U.S. is not alone in this. The top 1% of income earners in Britain have doubled their share of the national income from 6.5% to 13% since 1982. As Harvey shows, neoliberals were more Leninist than the Leninist, using think tanks as the intellectual vanguard to create the ideological climate in which capitalist realism could flourish. The immobilization model, which amounts to a demand to retain the Fordist disciplinary regime, could not work in Britain or the other countries in which neoliberalism has already taken hold. Fordism has definitely collapsed in Britain, with it the sites around which the old politics were organized. At the end of the control essay, Deleuze wonders what new forms of anti-control politics might take. One of the most important questions will concern the ineptitude of the unions, tied to the whole of their history of struggle against the disciplines or within the spaces of enclosure. Will they be able to adapt themselves, or will they give way to new forms of resistance against the societies of control? Can we already grasp the rough outlines of the coming forms capable of threatening the joys of marketing? Many young people strangely boast of being motivated. They request apprenticeships and permanent training. It's up to them to discover what they're being made to serve, just as their elders discovered, not without difficulty, the telos of the disciplines. Very interesting. What must be discovered is a way out of the motivation/demotivation binary, so that disidentification from the control program registers as something other than dejected apathy. One strategy will be to shift the political terrain, to move away from the union's traditional focus on pay and onto forms of discontent specific to post-Fordism. Before we analyze further, we must consider in more depth what post-Fordism actually is. So, that was a very interesting chapter, very fascinating how he's bringing about this sort of, what's the word? the movements, like the sustainability, not sustainability, like the non-permanence. Yes, the non-permanence of work, labor, standing, culture in this capitalist society sort of makes everything impermanent and loose and much more harder to organize around. And he sees that reflected in his students who are just basically coming to class seeking like joys and pleasures and entertainment and understanding, having an inherent understanding that the world that they're entering into doesn't actually care about a fixed set of knowledge that they will gain in the classroom, but rather how good they are at working the working the French fry deep fryer and how well they can work Microsoft Excel. That's it. You get what I'm saying? So that's very interesting. It's a very interesting chapter. I like that. That was the end of chapter 4, Reflexive Impotence, Immobilization, and Liberal Communism. We're reading the last chapter today, chapter 5, Don't Let Yourself Get Attached to Anything, October 6, 1979. A guy told me one time, says organized crime boss Neil McCauley in Michael Mann's 1995 film Heat, don't let yourself get attached to anything you are not willing to walk out on in 30 seconds flat if you feel the heat around the corner. One of the easiest ways to grasp the differences between Fordism and post-Fordism is to compare Mann's film with the gangster movies made by Francis Ford Coppola and Martin Scorsese between 1971 and 1990. In Heat, the scores are undertaken not by families with links to the old country, but by rootless crews in an LA of polished chromes and interchangeable designer kitchens, of featureless freeways and late-night diners. All the local color, the cuisine aromas, the cultural idealettes which the likes of The Godfather and Goodfellas depended upon have been painted over and refitted. Heat's Los Angeles is a world without landmarks, a branded sprawl, where markable territory has been replaced by endlessly repeating vistas of replicating franchises. The ghosts of old Europe that stalked Scorsese and Coppola streets have been exorcised, buried with the ancient beefs, bad blood and burning vendettas somewhere beneath the multinational coffee shops. You can learn a great deal about the world of Heat from considering the name Neil McCauley. It is an anonymous name, a fake passport name, a name that is bereft of history, even as ironically it echoes the name of British historian Lord Macaulay. Compare Corleone and remember that The Godfather was named after a village. Macaulay is perhaps the part that De Niro played that is closest to the actor's own personality. A screen, a cipher, deathless, icily professional, stripped down to pure preparation, research, method. I do what I do best. Okay, damn. Okay, he is just lighting up. What's his name? He's just lighting up Robert De Niro. Robert De Niro is not that bad of an actor. Okay, saying Robert De Niro basically has no soul on the screen is crazy. Robert, have you seen Heat the movie? Asked Nelson Moreno. Of course I saw Heat. It was okay. I saw it many, many years ago, like 20 years ago. So maybe I should revisit it. But I just thought it was okay. People hyped it up like, yo, that was Al Pacino and Robert De Niro's best performances. You know, I don't know. I like Scarface. I like Scarface. I like Scarface. I like The Godfather. You know, what am I supposed to say? De Niro is really good. That I agree with you, Nelson. But Mark Fisher is saying here that Robert De Niro is deathless and he's a cipher and he's just a man who prepares really well for the roles. He's just lighting his ass up. Damn, that's crazy. Anyway. Macaulay is no mafia boss, no puffed-up chief perched atop a Baroque hierarchy governed by codes as solemn and mysterious as those of the Catholic Church, and written in the blood of 1,000 feuds. His crew are professionals, hands-on entrepreneurs, speculators, crime technicians, whose credo is the exact opposite of Cosa Nostra, family loyalty. Family ties are unsustainable in these conditions, as Macaulay tells the Pacino character, the driven detective Vincent Hanna. Now, if you're on me and you gotta move when I move, how do you expect to keep a marriage? Hanna is Macaulay's shadow, forced to assume his insubstantiality, his perpetual mobility. Like any group of shareholders, Macaulay's crew is held together by the prospect of future revenue. Any other bonds are optional extras, almost certainly dangerous. Their arrangement is temporary, pragmatic, and lateral. They know that they are interchangeable machine parts, that there are no guarantees, that nothing lasts. Compared to this, the Goodfellas seem like sedentary sentimentalists, rooted in dying communities, doomed territories. The ethos espoused by Macaulay is the one which Richard Sennett examines in The Corrosion of Character, the personal consequences of work in the new capitalism, a landmark study of effective changes in the post-Fordist reorganization of work has brought about. The slogan which sums up the new conditions is "No long term," where formerly workers could acquire a single set of skills and expect to progress upwards through a rigid organizational hierarchy. Now they are required to periodically reskill as they move from institution to institution, from role to role. As the organization of work is decentralized, with lateral networks replacing pyramidal hierarchies, a premium is put on flexibility. Echoing Macaulay's mockery of Hannah in Heat, "How do you expect to keep a marriage?" Sennett emphasizes the intolerable stresses that these conditions of permanent instability put on family life. The values that family life depends upon, obligation, trustworthiness, commitment, are precisely those which are held to be obsolete in the new capitalism. See, this is what I'm saying. Capitalism within itself has the contradictions that will destroy itself. Because capitalism, is saying right here, creates the conditions that destroy the family. And what do we want as leftists? We want to abolish the family. So we're sort of like on the same track. So I can't wait until a few decades when, basically the governments are pressuring every single woman on earth by bribing them $1 million cash right then and there to birth 7 children over 6 years. When every government is trying to bribe a woman to open up her legs and reproduce, and maybe polygamy has come back into people's lives because nobody can afford the rent on just a 3-person salary. Because remember, the kids got to work too, because they can't move out. The kids got to work too, because they can't move out. Little Sally was able to move out because she started her OnlyFans, but little Bobby is still in the house because he can't get married. He's an incel cuck. So he's working the fryer. No, he's working the AI deep fryer at McDonald's. Mom and dad are still slaving away in the Starbucks mines. And daddy says, "You know what? I need another wife to keep up with my wife's 4 boyfriends that help us maintain our semi-opulent, lower middle class lifestyle." God, this world sucks. This world fucking sucks, man. Anyway, I'm continuing here. Mark Fisher says, "Yet, with the public sphere under attack and the safety nets that a nanny state used to provide being dismantled, the family becomes an increasingly important place of respite from the pressures of a world in which instability is a constant. The situation of the family as post-Fordist capitalism is contradictory. The situation of the family in post-Fordist capitalism is contradictory. In precisely the way that traditional Marxism expected, capitalism requires the family as an essential means of reproducing and caring for labor power, as a salve for the psychic wounds inflicted by anarchic social economic conditions, even as it undermines it, denying parents time with children, putting intolerable stresses on couples as they become the exclusive source of effective consolation for each other." Facts. Facts. I'm out here right now working hella hard on YouTube. My wife is in the other room working right now, teaching English. And the whole world is telling us, when are y'all going to have kids? When are you going to start a family? When are you going to buy a house? And the lack of economic opportunity under capitalism, under the search for more and more profit as they seek to lower and suppress wages, tell us at the same time that we're wrong for not being able to afford to start a family. The contradictions in and of themselves. Crazy, crazy. It's 7 p.m. and I'm not off the clock until about 12. I still got more work to do. And I can barely have time to be with my beautiful, sexy wife. What does that say? What does that say about this sick system? Continuing here. According to Marxist economist Christian Marazzi, the switch from Fordism to post-Fordism can be given a very specific date, on October 6, 1979. It was on that date that the Federal Reserve increased interest rates by 20 points, preparing the way for the supply-side economics that would constitute the economic reality in which we are now enmeshed. The rise in interest rates not only contained inflation, it made possible a new organization of the means of production and distribution. The rigidity of the Fordist production line gave way to new flexibility, a word that will send chills of recognition down the spine of every worker today. This flexibility was defined by a deregulation of capital and labor, with the workforce being casualized, with an increasing number of workers employed on a temporary basis, and workers were outsourced. Like Sennett, Marazzi recognizes that the new conditions both required and emerged from an increased cyberneticization of the working environment. The Fordist factory was crudely divided into blue and white collar work, with the different types of labor physically delimited by the structure of the building itself, laboring in noisy environments watched over by managers and supervisors. Workers had access to language only in their breaks, in the toilet, at the end of the working day, or when they were engaged in sabotage, because communication interrupted production. But in post-Fordism, when the assembly line becomes a flux of information, people work by communicating. As Norbert Wiener taught, communication and control entail one another. Work and life become inseparable. Capital follows you when you dream. Time ceases to be linear, becomes chaotic, broken down into punctiform divisions. As production and distribution are restructured, so are nervous systems. To function effectively as a component of just-in-time production, you must develop a capacity to respond to unforeseen events. You must learn to live in conditions of total instability or precarity, as the ugly neologism has it. Periods of work alternate with periods of unemployment. Typically, you find yourself employed in a series of short-term jobs, unable to plan for the future. Both Marazzi and Sennett point out that the disintegration of stable working patterns was in part driven by the desires of workers. It was they who, quite rightly, did not wish to work in the same factory for 40 years. In many ways, the left has never recovered from being wrong-footed by capital's mobilization and metabolization of the desire for emancipation from Fordist routine. That's deep. That's profound. That's profound. I mean, that's very true. I mean, the socialists, the union workers, the labor organizers were basically corralling people who are in the factories, saying, listen, we have to come together as workers in the factory to get better rights to work in the factory. But the innate human nature, which the communists and socialists do realize, is that we don't even want to be in the factory. We don't want to be tied to the factory. And guess who answered that desire quicker? The more dynamic, yet evil, capitalism. Because capitalism told the workers, oh, y'all want to unionize? Y'all don't want to work here for 40 years? Bet. See y'all in the temp agency. Okay, see y'all later. Let's go to India, guys. Guys, we're going to India. Fuck Detroit as a staff record label and as a motherfucking crew. We going to Bangalore. Anyway, so Nelson says, did neoliberalism destroy the infrastructure of alternatives? I think so. I think if you're talking about the idea that there is an alternative, I definitely think neoliberalism as the ideology that is ideology-less, that is formless, that is adherent-less, but yet still permeates and is able to dictate, then yes, neoliberalism has been probably the most successful ideology because it has, it's formless. It's like the black mafia. You don't see it, but they're there. You know what I mean? Anyway, I'm going to continue here. All right. So I'm going to read that sentence again because that was a very good sentence. In many ways, the left has never recovered from being wrong-footed by capital's mobilization and metabolization of the desire for emancipation from Fordist routine. Especially in the UK, the traditional representatives of the working class, union and labor leaders found Fordism rather too congenial. Its stability of antagonism gave them a guaranteed role. But this meant that it was easy for the advocates of post-Fordist capital to present themselves as the opponents of the status quo, bravely resisting an inertial, organized labor pointlessly invested in fruitless ideological antagonism, which served the ends of union leaders and politicians, but did little to advance the hopes of the class they purportedly represented. Ooh, he's spitting. Oh, he is spitting right there. Damn, Mark. Damn, take it easy on him, Mark. Damn. Basically what he's saying is that the union organizing, union leadership, the whole idea of, there being, strikes and organizations of workers basically became a racket. Basically, the unions became a type of, a part of the system. And politicians just use them to get elected or to be mouthpieces for their policies. Union leaders were getting enriched off of this, you know what I mean? And they were basically just trying to argue constantly more wages, more wages, more wages, more wages, when, it's deeper than that. You know what I'm saying? We need to abolish the wage system, as the IWW said, but that's for another day. But yeah, this is when you only have your goal on reforming the system. When your goal is only moderating the negative effects of capitalism, like the wage slave system, then you're gonna have shit like this. They're gonna eventually say, you know what? Y'all don't even deserve a factory. The capitalists will say that. Y'all don't even deserve what we giving y'all, peasants. Anyway, I'm gonna continue here. Antagonism is not now located externally in the face off between class blocks, but internally in the psychology of the workers who, as a worker, is interested in old-style class conflict, but as someone with a pension fund is also interested in maximizing the yield from his or her investments. There is no longer an identifiable external enemy. The consequence is, Marazi argues, that post-Fordist workers are like the Old Testament Jews after they left the house of slavery, liberated from a bondage to which they have no wish to return, but also abandoned, stranded in the desert, confused about the way forward. The psychological conflict raging within individuals cannot but have casualties. Marazi is researching the link between the increase in bipolar disorder and post-Fordism. And if, as Deleuze and Guattari argue, schizophrenia is the condition that marks the outer edges of capitalism, then bipolar disorder is the mental illness proper to the interior of capitalism. With its ceaseless boom and bust cycles, capitalism is itself fundamentally and irreducibly bipolar, periodically lurching between hyped-up mania, the irrational exuberance of bubble thinking, and depressive come-down. The term economic depression is no accident, of course. To a degree unprecedented in any other social system, capitalism both feeds on and reproduces the moods of populations. Without delirium and confidence, capital could not function. It seems that with post-Fordism, the invisible plague of psychiatric and affective disorders that has spread silently and stealthily since around 1750, that is, the very onset of industrial capitalism, has reached a new level of acuteness. Here, Oliver James's work is important. In The Selfish Capitalist, James points to significant rises in the rates of mental distress over the last 25 years. By most criteria, James reports, rates of distress almost doubled between people born in 1946, age 36 in 1982, and 1970, age 30 in 2000. For example, 16% of 36-year-old women in 1982 reported having trouble with nerves, feeling low, depressed, or sad, whereas 29% of 39-year-olds reported this in 2000. For men, it was 8% in 1982, 13% in 2000. Another British study James cites compared levels of psychiatric morbidity, which includes neurotic symptoms, phobias, and depression, in samples of people in 1977 and 1985. Whereas 22% of the 1977 sample reported psychiatric morbidity, this had risen to almost a third of the population, 31% by 1986. Since these rates are much higher in countries that have implemented what James calls selfish capitalism than in other capitalist nations, James hypothesizes that it is selfish, that is, neoliberalized, capitalist policies and culture that are to blame. Specifically, James points to the way in which selfish capitalism stokes up both aspirations and the expectations that they can be fulfilled. In the entrepreneurial fantasy society, the delusion is fostered that anyone can be Alan Sugar or Bill Gates. Never mind that the actual likelihood of this occurring has diminished since the 1970s. A person born in 1958 was more likely than one born in 1970 to achieve upward mobility through education, for example. The selfish capitalist toxins that are most poisonous to well-being are the systematic encouragement of the ideas that material affluence is the key to fulfillment, that only the affluent are winners, and that access to the top is open to anyone willing to work hard enough, regardless of their familial, ethnic, or social background. If you do not succeed, there is only one person to blame. James's conjectures about aspirations, expectations, and fantasy fit with my own observation of what I have called hedonic depression in British youth. It is telling, in this context of rising rates of mental illness, that New Labour committed itself early in its third term in government to removing people from incapacity benefit, implying that many, if not most, claimants are malingers. In contrast with this assumption, it doesn't seem unreasonable to infer that most of the people claiming incapacity benefits, and there are well in excess of 2 million of them, are casualties of capital. A significant proportion of claimants, for instance, are people psychologically damaged as a consequence of the capitalist realist insistence that industries such as mining are no longer economically viable. Even considered in brute economic terms, though, the argument about viability seems rather less than convincing, especially once you factor in the cost to taxpayers of incapacity and other benefits. Many have simply buckled under the terrifying, unstable conditions of post-Fordism. The current ruling ontology denies any possibility of a social causation of mental illness. The chemical biologization of mental illness is, of course, strictly commensurate with its depoliticization. Considering mental illness is an individual, chemical, biological problem, has enormous benefits for capitalism. Here he goes again. Will this guy shut up? Mark, shut up. I understand that you have a problem with mental health treatment as it's done today, but talk about something else, bro. Talk about something else, because once again, it's hard to buy this from a man who killed himself because he was depressed. Now, is he trying to lash out? Is he trying to give a call for help? Is this like Future? How Future in his song is like, Papa Molly, drinking lean. Is this a call for help? Like how Future be talking about all the drugs that he supposedly doesn't do? Or Tupac rapping about, I see death around the corner. Is this what you're doing? Because it's annoying. It's annoying, Mark. Get over it, okay? Mental health is something that people need to get treated on a personal level. We acknowledge that capitalism creates it, but you don't have to rant about it every single time. Jesus Christ. He sounds like Simon Hill keeps the Trill talking about white people. Okay, we get it. We get it. I'm sorry. I'm going to wrap up. I'm going to wrap up soon. We're about to finish here. This is the last paragraph. Anyway, considering mental illness an individual chemical biological problem has enormous benefits for capitalism. First, it reinforces capital's drive towards atomistic individualization. You are sick because of your brain chemistry. Second, it provides an enormously lucrative market in which multinational pharmaceutical companies can peddle their pharmaceuticals. We can cure you with our SSRIs. It goes without saying that all mental illnesses are neurologically instantiated, but this says nothing about their causation. If it is true, for instance, that depression is constituted by low serotonin levels, what still needs to be explained is why particular individuals have low levels of serotonin. This requires a social and political explanation, and the task of repoliticizing mental illness is an urgent one if the left wants to challenge capitalist realism. It does not seem fanciful to see parallels between the rising incidence of mental distress and new patterns of assessing workers' performance. We will now take a closer look at this new bureaucracy. Okay. All right, well, that's the end of chapter 5 right there. We will start chapter 6 in our next reading tomorrow. Chapter 6 is titled, All That Is Solid Melts into PR, Market Stalinism and Bureaucratic Anti-Production. So far, I'm enjoying this book. There's a lot that I agree with. There's a lot of thoughts in here that I've never thought before. And he's giving me some very interesting insights into how, when was Mark Fisher born? Mark Fisher was born in 1968, so I don't know if that makes him a boomer or an early Gen Xer. But I would say this is a very interesting way how, let's just say, early Gen Xers were thinking about the realities of the world post-Soviet Union. You know what I'm saying? So very interesting what Mark is writing here. We will continue. We're going to finish up this text in about how many more readings? We might just do 2 chapters per reading. So for tomorrow's episode, we're going to read chapters 6 and 7, and then the last reading, which we'll probably get to by Wednesday. There's no central exchange and Marxist super nanny will be chapters 8 and 9, and that will be the end of our reading. So hopefully you enjoyed this. Catch y'all next time. Y'all be easy out there. All power to the people and peace.